The nonprofit sector is in a state of flux. We need to get back to serving our communities. As people-based businesses, nonprofits who succeed during COVID-19 likely have adaptable, strong cultures. Hello, and thank you for taking time to listen to Lapiana Consulting's presentation on culture in the era of COVID-19. I'm Luis Vergara, a partner at Lapiana Consulting. As the nonprofit sector responds to the COVID-19 crisis, there are many changes at hand, and we need to be able to adapt to those changes. Today, we are interviewing Abi Karlin-Resnick, Executive Director at Health Connected, who will talk us through how they managed change during COVID. Before we dive into that interview, I just wanted to point out that our recent survey of nonprofit leaders indicated that most have changed how they operate and will likely continue to change and adapt into the near future. As such, change will be constant in the sector, and how we adapt will be crucial. To get more grounded on the context for what is occurring, I asked my friend and colleague, Abi Karlin-Resnick, the Executive Director of Health Connected, about the changes her organization has undergone in the past few months in relation to COVID-19. Abi, thanks for joining me, and thanks for taking the time to do this. Anything else you'd like to add about Health Connected that you want our listeners to know?
No, I think the only other thing is just that we're based in the Bay Area, but we serve the whole state of California. So that has impacted how we've thought about our work in this very different time over the last couple of months.
Great. So, as you know, we're really focusing on culture, Abi. And one of the things that I want to start with is just by asking you a little bit about how would you best describe, Health Connected, specifically the organizational culture pre-COVID? What would be kind of some of the key hallmarks of the culture at the organization?
Yeah, I think there's two things that really come to mind. The first thing is, I think we've really cultivated a pretty familial kind of culture where all of our staff really generally enjoy spending time with each other. We have a pretty informal culture, although we're very thoughtful and careful about how we interact with each other. We have definitely a much more informal type of culture and way of interacting with each other. And then I think along with that has been a real commitment to consensus building. Certainly we don't hit that in all of our decision making, but it's something that's been really important to me, is really seeking out input from our whole team, regardless of position or type of work. And so that commitment to consensus and really trying to be transparent in our decision-making processes has been really two very important pieces of our organizational culture.
Great. And, and how about in terms of, what happened when COVID-19 hit? I mean, how did it impact the organization? How did it impact, specifically your culture as well?
Yeah, well, I think to answer that, it's helpful to understand how we thought about distance learning in the context of our work. So all of our work in sexual health education has been entirely in person for the last 25 years since we were founded. And I think it's fair to say that we were pretty reticent in general pre-COVID to even consider any type of technological approach to sex ed, with the real feeling that these are social skills that we're trying to build. And certainly there's a lot of information that can be imparted, but there is really important things that happen when we're in person providing instruction. And I think that's an important backdrop for all of this, because when it became clear that we were not going to be able to provide instruction in person for some period of time, and early on, of course, it was pretty unknown, we actually had to figure out pretty quickly how to get clear consensus on how to approach this from an instructional perspective. So, there was, to some degree, it was me saying, well, we should at least try to figure out what this might look like if we had to do a few sessions online, which of course, in retrospect, sounds a little silly, just a few sessions and then we'll be all back to normal.
Right.
But I think, I think two things there. One is because we already had an established culture around making decisions together and talking through them, that in many ways made it easier for us to quickly make that transition. But I think the flip side of all of this is that because we have such a familial, connected, informal culture, sort of person to person, moving from a work environment, moving from an in-person work environment to an online work environment, all working remotely, that actually made things very challenging because we were used to, kind of quickly on the fly having a chat about something, and that's not as easy when you're working remotely. And so we had these two things happening. We were able to really quickly move our programs into virtual programming, but at the same time, we had to really completely sort of shift this familial personal culture in our new work environment.
Right. That's good. And, I'm curious because kind of a couple of follow-ups. It sounds like you definitely slowly adapted just because of those, that familial quality that you all had as part of your culture. Now that you've delivered some of the program, I'm wondering, how are the kids and the young people adapting to what you're delivering? Have you gotten any sense of that? Is it easy to kind of get a sense of it, or even the educators that you're working with? How are they adapting to it? So are they taking to it, or it's still a little difficult?
Yeah, it's been a really interesting transition. One of the things I've noticed over the last 2.5, 3 months is we've gone through these very clear cycles. I mean, it is really like being on a roller coaster. The first, 3 weeks or so, we were all kind of energized maybe by the, adrenaline or the excitement of creating new programs and figuring out what's happening in our world and adjusting to that. And then about 3 weeks in, it was really clear we needed to make sure that our educators were retrained in this entirely new modality for sexual health instruction. And we really hit this point where kind of everybody got really, the anxiety really took over. This was it's the stress of really starting a new job. That was what I equated it to. And we all started new jobs in mid-March without really intending to do that.
It's a good way to think of it. Yeah.
Yeah. And that sensation of sort of drinking from the fire hose of just trying to get your head around this entirely new way of working and teaching, especially for our educators, all while we were trying to figure out things like platforms and, webinar licenses and all of those different things, relearning how to do program evaluation because the amount and type of data that you can collect is totally different in many ways. So we sort of hit this wall about 3 or 4 weeks in, and that was also the point at which the shelter in place got extended too, so it started to feel a little interminable. And then around mid-April, we started actually delivering programs, and it became clear that there was, that not only was it gonna work, but actually that there were some really interesting benefits that came out of it, which I'll share in a minute. But and then we sort of, we were delivering programs, and then we kind of got to about late May and hit another wall because it was it's feeling like it's going on forever, and we were still are delivering a lot of instruction. So our educators right now are delivering somewhere between 14 and 16 webinars a day across the team, and generally for somewhere between 50 and 75 students in each of those. So it's a lot of teaching. But what I think is really fascinating for both young people and parents. So with young people, while we lose out on the social skill building because the way we've developed it is a mix of synchronous and asynchronous instruction, And with the synchronous instruction, we have made the interactivity all one way. So students aren't interacting with each other because we didn't feel like we could guarantee student safety and privacy in that way, but they are interacting with the course content to our educators as they're teaching. And what's been really interesting with that is that it actually levels the playing field in a lot of ways and eliminates a lot of the social dynamics that we often see in an in-person classroom. So where, often there are some much louder voices, students who are willing to speak up, who are much more extroverted, or who have stronger, a higher level of social power in a group. That all disappears in an online environment because students don't know what any other student is sharing through our chats and our polls and the types of questions that are being asked. Only our educators know that. And so our educators have reported that actually, in many ways, they see much more significant engagement from the students, and they've been really, really thoughtful in their engagement. And it's not to say that we don't have students who sort of act as trolls or behave inappropriately in the courses. That is all entirely age appropriate, especially for the type of content that we're teaching about. But for the most part, students have been incredibly thoughtful and engaged and share really nice things in our post-course evaluations about really appreciating the opportunity to think and reflect about the information. And then I think similarly, we have also started doing weekly parent information sessions on the course content, which we used to do in person, and we do it for each district that we were serving as they requested it. And those could often be fairly anxiety ridden, I think, when doing them in person, because often the parents who are coming are the ones who have the most concerns for whatever reason about the content. And they're and then there's also folks who have very, very strong feelings, either want to make sure that it is as inclusive as possible, and focus on positive aspects of sexuality and relationships, or families who have very strong values about sexuality and relationships. And so in-person experiences with parents can often be quite challenging in some cases to facilitate. And we've set up our information sessions online in a very similar way to our classroom instruction, so that all of the interaction is one way, and it's a totally different experience. We've had just wonderful comments from parents, not that we don't have questions or concerns that get expressed, but really nice comments from parents afterwards saying thank you for the informative presentation, and really appreciating the opportunity to be a part of it and find out how they can best support their students. And so it has removed a lot of that perhaps antagonism that can come up with the information that we're presenting.
Right. Totally understand that and get it. Yeah, and it's always sex, health, and education is always really difficult, and I can imagine this does kind of provide a little bit of protection, I guess, in certain ways for them. So it's good. Mm-hmm. Abby, so, kind of an obvious question, but maybe not so obvious, but in terms of what, if it was a yes or no, it'd be easy, but, we're not done. And I feel like we're entering the new norm. I mean, do you see additional big changes for the organization ahead? Do you feel like this is it, or do you feel like you're going to be continually adapting in the next few months, years, maybe even?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think one of the things that this has really built up for us organizationally is it's kind of built our adaptation muscle. Okay. It's helped our team become more familiar with, if not comfortable. I don't know if everyone's comfortable, but familiar with a sense of uncertainty and a need to be ready to adapt and adapt quickly. So that has been really fantastic. I think there's really no question in my mind that we have to be ready to adapt to whatever is coming. It's my general feeling over the last couple of months, and I think going forward, is that I don't know what things are going to look like in 2 to 4 weeks. And so I can make a set of decisions based on the information I have now, but we're going to get more information, and then that's going to require us to change our approach. Maybe it's just a tweak, but maybe we have to take we have to totally rethink something. And so I've really been trying to reinforce to our team, this is what we know now, and so this is the decision that makes the most sense right now, but that could change if we get more information, and that's okay. And we're going to make mistakes, and that's also okay. So I think that's challenging for a team that really wants to do things well and doesn't like to make mistakes, which is totally understandable and human. But this has definitely given us an opportunity to get really comfortable with growth mindset. And also, I think it sets us up to have, big conversations about organizational sustainability and what that means. And it's given me an opportunity to invite our whole team into how I think about these problems as a leader, so that they can grow into leaders as well, whether here at Health Connected or with some other organization in the future. And we are definitely looking at ways to be creative and thinking about our organizational structure. I think every nonprofit organization, but especially small organizations, have to be thinking about partnering with other organizations in some way, because it is quickly, I think, going to be infeasible for small organizations to sustain in a much more competitive environment. So that is definitely, it's something that's been on our mind for quite a while. It is, I think, even more imperative in this moment. And I would anticipate that, we're going to have to just really rethink how we do all of our work. 2.5 months ago, distance learning was not even on our radar as an organization, and now it is a core aspect of what we do, which is, interesting and challenging in many ways, and creates some really interesting opportunities. Like, for example, when I mentioned earlier that we work in, across the state of California, when we're doing distance learning, we're not bound by state lines. And so what does that mean for us from a strategy perspective? We've used sort of geography as a filter for us from a strategy perspective for, forever as an organization. And that is no longer something that we necessarily have to pay attention to if we don't want to.
That's great. And Abby, just, it's kind of, we're talking about culture, and my assumption, and one of the reasons I want to talk to you is because the way I always looked at Health Connected is you really do have a strong culture and kind of one that's identifiable. Do you feel like that lent itself to helping you and your staff be more adaptable? Was that having that strong culture, a culture that's been adaptable, a culture that's familial? Did that help you?
Yeah, definitely. There's really no question in my mind that it helped us. And I have to remind our team, it's not like we were just lucky in being able to come up with distance learning. We were able to come up with our approach to distance learning because we already built up a lot of the muscles that we didn't even realize we were building in order to be able to make such a significant programmatic shift very, very quickly. Really in the span of pretty much 2 weeks, we totally shifted our program implementation from in-person to distance learning, and with no prior knowledge or experience. And we couldn't have done that if we didn't have close personal connections and trust in each other. We couldn't have done that if we hadn't previously adapted to, external environment shifts, for example, legal shifts in the work that we do, and needing to shift quickly with that, and having to previously have dealt with, large scale controversy or pushback to the work that we do. That requires very, very quick response times and getting multiple cross-functional teams working together. So all of those things were skills that we had built up maybe without realizing it. So it's not just chance or luck that we were able to do this. We were able to do this because we've really built up these different skill sets within our organization, within our culture, over many, many years.
Right. No, and that's good. And like you said, maybe it wasn't completely intentional, but there were some things there. And one of the things that we find throughout the course of our work is that a lot of times we focus in the nonprofit sector. We say, oh, we need strategic planning, or we need to figure out how to train our board or develop our board a little bit better, or whatever it might be. But we don't always pay attention to culture, and it's just one of those critical pieces. And I think more so now than ever, and that's kind of a big part of what we're talking to. When you think about like just supporting that as an effort, just like people support, oh yeah, you want to do a strategic plan, you go out and get funding or others sometimes. What would be your message maybe to funders, donors, supporters in terms of should they be supporting culture change, and should they be helping you think about organizational change management in general, or do you think they're better suited to just support strategic planning, if you will, or other key components?
Yeah, it's really tough. I mean, it's a great question. If you had to ask me how I built our culture or how our culture was built, I'm not sure that there's a whole lot of intentionality that has gone into it beyond just, to some degree, this is the kind of place that I want to work, and this is, how I think as a leader, we want to be able to respond to need and how to respond to what we're hearing from young people or parents or teachers. So I couldn't point to sort of specific actions that I've taken during my tenure over the last 7 years at Health Connected that have specifically molded our culture. Although I'm sure if I thought hard enough about it, I could point to some things. But it's these little micro things that a leader does to create that culture. And no one thing specifically contributes to it. It's the summative effect of all of those things together. And so I guess I struggle a little bit with how a funder can specifically support that shift, because it really takes a lot of time. I'm
Right.
sure there are a lot of organizational change experts out there who have, including you all, who have really fantastic ways of being able to facilitate those kinds of changes and help organizations become more adaptable. The difficulty is I worry a little bit that organizations that don't already kind of have that built in this moment, this is a really challenging time to then be trying to go back and figure out how to build that adaptability into your culture. And so, I think strategic planning is really important. We probably have to, as a field, kind of rethink how we think about strategic planning.
Right.
And, I think over the last 10 years, at least, there has been much more of a movement away from the giant 30-page document that is bound and sits on the shelf, and that's our strategic plan for the next 4 years, and nobody looks at it. There definitely has been a shift away from that there's probably even more of a shift that these current circumstances have highlighted.
Great. So, those are really kind of the major questions I had, Abby. I don't know if you have any other thoughts or anything else you'd want to leave folks with in terms of just thinking about, culture and kind of what you've learned through the last few months, which feels like the last few years, probably.
Yeah. Well, I think, as a leader, it's definitely challenged me in so many ways, not just the kind of leading the organization through this transitional time, but also being comfortable myself with messing up. I just like the rest of my team and most people, I don't like to make mistakes because mistakes have an impact on other people. But I've definitely had to get much more comfortable with that and also gain some perspective on it of like, oh, I messed up on that one again. All right, well, what do I need to do to, fix that a little bit and move forward? And how can I use this as an example for the rest of my team? Those are all things that I really wanted to work on as a leader prior to COVID. And I think this has just accelerated that learning process for me.
Great. Well, thanks again, Abby. I really do appreciate the time and consideration. And for those of you listening who would like to get a little bit more information, Health Connected is an organization based out of the Bay Area and work locally and potentially with the breaking down of barriers in the help of Zoom nationally now. So thanks again,
Great.
Abby.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thanks for thinking of me.
Thanks again, Abby. So some steps you can take as you consider how to adapt your culture. First, have generative culture discussions with staff. Ask them what's working, what needs to change for them to be successful, and how change will benefit your organization. These continuous conversations will be really helpful in having your organization and your staff adapt to what's needed. Get help. Culture change needs to be intentional. Much like strategic planning or any kind of other assistance you might get, getting help from a professional is really important, at least to guide you. They can help establish structures for making change and adopting culture and really help you think through this and be a thought partner that you may need. Also talk to funders about how they might support the development of your culture. Right now, there's no better time to go and see if you can get some assistance for this type of work. And then don't be afraid to adapt your culture as needed. Change is necessary for growth and development. Creating adaptive cultures that will adjust with your organizational change is crucial. So don't be afraid of change, embrace it. Again, we really want to thank you for the time. And for more information on La Piana, please visit us at www.lapiana.org. Thanks again.